All right, let's dive into one of the most fascinating and, let's be honest, controversial topics in modern relationships, attraction. Specifically, we're going to look at the theories that claim to have totally cracked its code.
You know the feeling, right? A relationship kicks off with this incredible magnetic pull. But then, somewhere down the line, that fiery passion can cool off and turn into, well, something more like comfortable friendship. The big question is, why? Why does that happen?
One very popular and, pretty debated theory says the culprit is a loss of something called sexual polarity. So today, we're going to explore this whole idea from every angle. We'll look at the super rigid old school rules, then move to some more flexible modern takes, and finally, we're going to see how it all holds up when we put it through a serious psychological reality check. Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start at the most extreme end of the spectrum. This is what you could call the fixed roles model. And it's definitely the most prescriptive and, for a lot of people, the most controversial version of this whole idea. So this right here is the fundamental belief of the fixed model. Proponents, like the well-known author David Data, argue that genuine, lasting attraction is all about these distinct, opposing energies. On one side, you've got the masculine core, which is all about mission, purpose, and direction. And on the other, the feminine core, which is about the flow of love and emotion. The theory is actually pretty simple. To keep that spark, you have to stay in your lane. You have to consistently embody your core energy.
And this model can get incredibly specific about what that means. The author Pat Allen just puts it out there, saying that to maintain this polarity, a feminine woman should acquiesce to masculine leadership. So we're not just talking about different vibes here, we're talking about a very clear hierarchy of who leads and who surrenders.
And the big problem this model claims to fix is something called depolarization. You'll hear figures like Tony Robbins talk about this a lot. He says it's what absolutely destroys intimacy. The idea is that when partners become too similar, say both start operating in that masculine, directive energy, that magnetic charge just fizzles out. Boof! The attraction is gone.
Okay, so that's the fixed model in a nutshell. But what happens when we hold these ideas up to the bright light of clinical psychology? This is where the theory faces its toughest challenge, and honestly, where things can get a little uncomfortable.
Just take a look at this for a second. When you put the fixed polarity dynamic right next to the clinical dynamic of a narcissist borderline relationship, which is a well-documented, very unhealthy pattern, the parallels are kind of shocking. The masculine drive to lead and direct starts looking an awful lot like a narcissistic need for admiration. And that feminine role of yielding and relying on a partner for safety, it has some really uncomfortable echoes of the intense fear of abandonment that's often a hallmark of borderline personality traits. And the parallels really don't stop there. That whole idea of feminine surrender, when you break it down, lines up almost perfectly with the clinical definition of codependency. When you read this list, excessive reliance on a partner, always putting their needs first, losing your own boundaries, basically abandoning yourself to keep the relationship going, you're not really looking at a personality type. You're looking at a list of red flags for an unhealthy dynamic. So all of this leads to a really crucial question. For this polarity thing to work, does it have to be a permanent identity that you're locked into? Or could it be something more fluid? You know, a role you can consciously choose to play depending on the situation. And that question really opens the door to a completely different approach.
And that brings us right into a middle ground, a model where polarity isn't some fixed state of being, but more of a flexible, situational dance. So in this view, it's not about who you are at your core, it's about what you do in a particular moment. You know, maybe one partner takes the lead on managing the finances, while the other takes the lead on planning social events. You're consciously shifting between these directive and receptive energies based on what the situation calls for. The huge difference here, it's a dance you choose to be in, not a prison cell you're assigned to.
And this really gets to the heart of a major paradox in modern love. Something the world-renowned therapist Esther Perel talks about all the time. We want our partner to be our rock, to give us security, but we also want passion and excitement. The thing is, security often comes from sameness and predictability, while passion thrives on mystery and a little bit of otherness. Perel argues that desire actually needs that space to breathe, and this kind of flexible dance of roles can be one way to create that space without anyone having to give up their power or equality in the partnership.
But what if we took this whole thing one step further? What if the real goal isn't about balancing two different halves of a whole? What if it's about each partner becoming a whole, complete, integrated person all on their own? Well, that brings us to the integration model. In psychology, the real ideal, the goal we're all aiming for, is something called interdependence. It's that healthy sweet spot in the middle. On one extreme, you have codependence, where boundaries are blurry and you kind of lose yourself in the we. On the other extreme, you have total independence, where the walls are so high that true connection is impossible. Interdependence is where two whole people with strong individual identities come together to create an even stronger we, based on shared power and clear, flexible boundaries.
The therapist Terry Real is a huge champion of this idea. He argues that the goal should be radical equality. He wants us to move past what he calls psychological patriarchy. That's that subtle, often unconscious belief that traditionally masculine qualities, like being in control, are somehow more valuable than traditionally feminine ones, like being vulnerable. The goal isn't a power struggle or a hierarchy. It's a true partnership of equals.
Okay, so we've looked at the rigid model, the flexible dance, and this ideal of integration. After all of that, what does the actual science tell us really predicts lasting passion and a healthy, thriving relationship? Well, when you look at the science, the most proven, most validated framework for understanding how we relate to each other isn't polarity theory, it's attachment theory. And it has basically nothing to do with masculine or feminine roles. It's all about our deep internal wiring for how we connect with people and how safe we feel doing it.
And here's the really good news. Research suggests that more than half of us, around 50 to 60%, have what's called a secure attachment style. That means we're naturally pretty comfortable with both closeness and our own independence. For people with more anxious or avoidant styles, though, you can kind of see why rigid roles might seem attractive. They offer a clear, predictable script that can help manage all that underlying insecurity.
So, if you were to boil down decades of clinical research, the true pillars of a great relationship become crystal clear. It's not about playing a role, it's about things like attachment security, it's about emotional intelligence, it's about shared power and true equality, and it's about being able to negotiate life's curveballs together as a team of two whole, complete individuals.
So, if there's one thing to take away from all of this, it's this. A healthy, passionate, lasting relationship doesn't really come from conforming to a set of external, prepackaged roles. It comes from cultivating internal skills, skills like emotional intelligence and a secure, confident sense of who you are. Which leads us with a final question to think about. Is a relationship built on a stronger foundation when it's based on prescribed roles, or when it's built on the shared wholeness of two complete individuals? It's a powerful idea to sit with. Thanks so much for joining me for this one.